Hello and welcome. It's Jules again with Ancient Moon Woman and Friends, and it's my honour and pleasure to introduce Marja West. Marja, welcome.
Hi, Jules. Thank you so much for having me.
So I'm on my scour around Facebook looking for people who I find spiritually inspirational. You're in there. So I like to drop people in at the deep end and ask whether you would talk about your own spiritual journey at whatever point you want to start. It's over to you.
Okay. Um, I believe my spiritual journey began probably at my conception and particularly at my birthing because I did not want to come out. I was 3 weeks late. It was scheduled to arrive on planet Earth on the 30th of September. And I waited until the 21st of October to get out. And I was actually induced by midwives herbally and came out. They specifically had me come out on the 21st at high noon. And so it began there. And unfortunately, my mother was a very unhappy, psychotic woman who did not want to have a baby, resented the fact that she had me. My parents were not together ever. They had a one-night stand. Oops. And I am the result of that. So from the very beginning, I've had this very combative relationship with my own mother. And of course, that has inspired a journey of really unraveling that shadow piece of feeling as a child from the very beginning, unwanted, unloved. There's something wrong with me. And to start from that point has been really my reason for being in unraveling that. Because my childhood was very unpleasant. It was violent. It was abusive in all respects. And, without going into too many details, I had the wild imagination of imagining myself to be a magical, fierce fairy. And I'm not talking about, the pretty little, gossamer winged fairy.
Yeah.
But the fairy where it's like, you know what, I have skills. Don't mess with me.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of where I really began my spiritual sort of pagan roots. And my background as a Jewish person, notwithstanding, I was never practicing. I didn't follow it. I just thought it was just kind of odd. And so I went down little rabbit holes like that, considered all the Abrahamic religions very early on because I was confused, because I would see a lot of hypocrisy within my family. And when we immigrated to America, just the hypocrisy of all these people who were praising Jesus and then, drinking and whoring. On the flip side of their secret lives. So it always confused me. And I feel like I was very much protected at the same time where all this awful stuff was happening. I had little sentinels, if you will, within my family and neighbors who looked after me and would point out, your mom is a little off. A lot off. Like, for instance, I have a memory of when I was 10 years old coming back from the grocery store. I was driving at 9. And in America, you don't get a permit license to drive until 50. I didn't know any of this stuff. And it was a neighbor across the street who saw me unpacking groceries. And I was a teeny, teeny, tiny little girl. Where I'd have to sit on cushions, have the seat all the way up to even drive the car. But I love driving. It's like it got me out of the house. I learned how to drive very, very early on. And a neighbor knocked on the door after I unpacked the groceries and said, Marja, I would like to speak to your mom. And so my mom would go, came out, and so here was our neighbor, Ida, who was from Texas, and she had this beautiful Texas accent. And my mom's nickname is Sid. Sid, do you realize that your daughter should not be driving? She's not old enough. And my mother basically told her to F off and slammed the door in her face and told her to mind her own business. And that was like a clue. It's like, I guess I shouldn't be driving.
Yeah.
You know, but that's kind of some of the crazy stuff where, you know, you don't know any better. And English is my second language. So I was in a school where I had to learn English. I learned UK based English, which still confuses me to this day. Not UK based, but American based. I don't get a lot of the sort of social things. Like, I don't get it. I don't get it a lot.
It's almost like a dialect, isn't it?
Yes.
So you've got the same language, but we speak different dialects. So certain words mean different things, like hood and boot and bonnet and, you know, often around the car, isn't it?
And knickers, jumpers, all that kind of stuff. Yeah. So when I was living in London right before the COVID, it was more, I don't like London. I don't like cities. I like to be in the mountains, in a glen. I'd rather be in the hills somewhere than in a city. That was very, very hard, you know, to deal with because of all the energies and all the people. So part of my spiritual journey, I feel like, because of my crazy childhood, was really learning how to stay within, so to speak.
Yeah.
And learning how to not rely on the outer reality of what is actual materialized to reflect to me my worth, my sense of being, and who I was.
Yeah, I get it. I totally get it. And it does reflect very similarly my own journey. And again, not to go into too much detail, but it's that certain things that I was expected to do, tasks that I was given to do, and often wanting to say no and actually standing up and saying no, and then getting a, you know, so you'll do it. Physical violence to make me comply. Then I became
a coercion of complicity.
And what happened was I flipped to the polar opposite and became very, very resistant. But what happened was then that resistance came into my being, and who did it hamper? No one else other than me.
Yes.
So I developed a coping strategy like that. Like you called yourself a fierce fairy. The thing that came up to me was dragon. And dragon in the shamanic is the highest of wisdom, isn't it? You know, it's the highest of wisdom. And what came up for me was the image of a dragon fairy almost. And I adopted the dragon persona. I will, if you come near me, I'll set fire to you.
Beautiful.
You know, literally, I'll breathe on you and I will set you on fire. So I became very fierce, but in a not a boundaried way. It was more like a shield wall. You know, almost like
I think we have to learn that. We have to learn that, Jules, because who is, you know, when we're being abused by the people who are supposed to caretake us, you know, across all categories of being a child where we're supposed to be protected and they're not, we have to learn how to fend for ourselves.
Yeah. So the mechanisms we adopt, they're just out of desperation and will cling on to anything. And for some reason, we become what we are as a child in that defense mode.
Yes.
And lots of children will adopt different coping mechanisms. And I'm fascinated to try and understand why I adopted particular coping mechanisms that other wounded people might not have done. Some calm down, some become combatant, some become resistant, you know. But in all cases, it ends up with self-sabotage as we try to become an adult. We have to go through that. I believe we have to go through the recognition that actually what we're doing is we're bringing coping mechanisms through into adulthood that only served us when we were children.
Yes.
However, because they are our coping mechanisms, they are still part of our nature. And for me, it was being able to put them into right relationship, the dragon aspect, and adopting the
Mhm.
wisdom of the dragon rather than just like the fierceness and the anger. And, it was
Right.
it's doing that reframe. It's doing using language. Like some people call it NLP. I can't stand the thought of NLP, to be fair, because I think it's been misused by
Yeah,
the
it
marketing
has. It's been
industry.
completely hijacked in
Absolutely.
a very negative way.
Yeah. So I don't talk about NLP because the word programming makes me want to go, because
Yes.
there's enough programming of people goes on in this world
Yeah.
to sink 20 million battleships. Who needs any more of it? So
Yeah.
let's call it reframing. Let's call it almost managing energy,
Yes. Yes.
which
It's
language is.
the reconfiguration of one's mind.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Because from a spiritual stance, I am a great student of the Hermetic principles,
Yeah.
in natural law. So the first principle of mentalism, the world is mind, the universe is mental. Okay,
Yeah.
we are of that one mind,
Yeah.
but our minds are configured differently, as many different ways as there are people
Yeah.
on planet Earth.
Yeah.
So I've had to play with that. And I was fortunate enough when I was 12 to be gifted by neighbors who were moving away. I had fabulous neighbors. And there was an Indian couple, and they had a daughter who was one of my good friends. And her parents they were deep thinkers. They were students of Krishnamurti, who I absolutely love, and Neville Goddard, and they were part of the New Thought movement, as it were.
Yeah.
And they gifted me these books, one of which was The Kabbalion. And now, granted, their cat peed all over the box, so it smelled like cat pee, but I didn't care. I remember just reading it and going, oh, this is like me pretending that I'm a fierce fairy.
Yeah.
And really transcending my outer circumstances and not allowing that to tell me who I am. And so I was very lucky. So I read that when I was 12 and started playing with it and really started seeing myself in a different way, not just as a fairy, but the maker of my own destiny. And when I was 14, I made up my mind. I had to go. The violence was starting to escalate very, very badly. And I found myself out of my family home and in with loving people.
Right.
The mother of a good friend of mine had actually witnessed an event with my mother out in public. My mom had no shame whatsoever. She would act out and do horrible things in front of people where people were like, people would pretend they didn't see it. And then there were other people that would go, hey, lady, you should not be doing that.
Yeah.
And, she would just ignore them. So, and I think that's been part of my journey, is that I have been fortunate, as I've mentioned earlier, that I have these sentinels. I have these people, these sort of divine interventionaries, intervening, if you will, looking after me and pointing to me that I'm on the right track and that I'm doing good. And, and of course, they would be gone in a hot minute, a hot second. So I couldn't rely on that. And I think that's part of, it sounds to me that's part of your journey too, to be able to be reliant upon yourself and not relying on other people.
That sort of, when I said I became resistant, so, the dragon energy, don't come near me. So I would end up battling,
Yeah.
you know, I was going down a different path. I would stand my ground, and I would fight, and I'd fight back. And then I became the perpetrator because I fought back and defended myself. I was
Yes.
then accused of being the perpetrator. So I was literally kicked out, basically, sent to
Yeah.
live
Yeah.
with a father that had not been around for about 5 or 6 years, who'd remarried, they'd got then more kids, and she'd already got kids, and it was just a house full of kids. And I was ended up being Cinderella. I was 15 and ended up doing most of the babysitting of the kids. So I had a couple of years of,
Yeah.
I never want kids,
Yeah.
you know? Whoa,
Yeah.
no, I don't want kids. And then what happens? All the universe heard was my desperation, and I got pregnant.
Yeah.
But that's another story because I
Yeah.
loved my child.
Yeah.
Something happened when I
You
found
were
out
a
I was
good
pregnant.
dragon mama. You were a
I
good
was a good
dragon
dragon
mama.
mother.
I was
Yeah.
too. I was
Something
too.
happened when I got pregnant. It was almost, you know, when you get those knowings that just go all the way through your body. I was 20 years old, and this knowing went through my body. And I just found this calmness and this
Beautiful.
almost not quite a voice, but a knowing that this child was going to be born, and this child was going to be just something really, really special.
Aw.
And then I went into guilt thinking, oh my God, I've got a God complex, thinking I'm going to give birth to Jesus Christ. Then, you know, I think I'm, you know, the Virgin Mary or something. So I shifted myself away from that because I thought it was a bit silly. But I just thought, well, for me, this child has to be born. There is no question of not continuing with the pregnancy because that was
That's
always
so
an option.
beautiful. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it was just a no, this child will be born, and I don't
Yeah.
care. The
Yeah.
most important thing is for me to bring this child through.
Yeah.
And the love that I
Oh,
had for that child was like instantaneous. And
that's that's so
God, I
beautiful
suppose my
to
first
hear.
spiritual epiphany was that.
That's such a beautiful story, Cher. I'm so touched by that, and you and we grew up in an era where we were being bombarded by this crazy stuff of of abortion and just all of the man-hating stuff. I know for me, when I started university, I started very early. Um, because mostly, in the indoctrination centers in America are they're terrible. I mean, I was bored so badly, and of course I was a little belligerent, because I wasn't having a lot of the I remember being told during these fire drills, nuclear drills, whatever, to hide under our desks. And I was the one that was going, excuse me, what is the efficacy of this nonsense? I mean, are we talking about the nuclear wind here? Because I was very privy to, how fusion, fission, the atomic, how all that worked. And I'm thinking, you're having us hide under our desks here. That is just
And
BS.
it's not funny, really, but I'm laughing at the idiocy.
Completely. And people bought it. My classmates were looking at me like, what's wrong with you? Why are you fighting the teacher? Because it's nonsense. It's complete nonsense. So, going back to that, we were just having all this false information, put in our faces. And if you question that reality, I got detention a lot in the hallways. And so for me, I was a little gymnast. So I would practice my tumbling runs up and down the hallways because they didn't want me in there questioning the teachers. And so, I was lucky in that sense. But what that creates, though, is that sort of reclusive hermit. Like, a lot of people think I'm a very social person. I'm not a social person. I am in an arena where over the years I've had to build a private practice. So I do a lot of events, but I'm the kind of person that on a speaking thing, I go into the room before the event and I'm looking at the exits to see how fast I can get out of there afterwards so I don't get hit, because, people coming at me, that is a frightening thing for me, And I think that is, when we grow up in abuse and then we have to try to fend for ourselves. I mean, you check into the average 14-year-old right now. They can barely dress themselves on their own. I can't even imagine, I mean, I was cooking for myself when I was like 7 or 8.
Yeah.
I just don't get it. And so it's really such a different time that you and I grew up in, where we really had to grow up very, very quickly.
And I think as well, we were swept up on that. For me, it was like in the 60s, the women's lib, burn your bra.
Yeah.
And I was like, I don't get
it. I never saw that happen, by the way. I never, ever saw that for myself.
There were marches in, I think, London, and I used to see it on the news or read it in the newspaper. Oh, there's a women's lib march in London. Oh, they're burning the bras, and, they're climbing lampposts and going bare-chested, and there'd be a photograph in the paper, But then they'd have it covered. The boobs would be covered, because obviously women's boobs are so, I think, dangerous, aren't they? So they would have to cover the women's boobs. And but I didn't get it. I was like, what's all this about women's lib? I didn't understand what my mother and her generation were experiencing, because I was kind of mid-generation. I was too young to be a women's libber and a hippie, but old enough to understand about, oh, I'll be able to get the pill very soon.
We're on that cusp we're on the cusp of the baby boomers to the Gen Xers. I identify as a Gen Xer for sure. Yeah. I know you do too. I mean, we're
probably do.
Cutting edge. We're cutting edge, where we're willing to take responsibility and not pin it on men. And that was the whole thing. My experience at university very early on is that I was recruited by second wave feminists, who are basically these middle-aged, very unhappy women who had gone through very bad relationships, raised children, did not find satisfaction or fulfillment in that, and got caught up in the whole Marxist takeover of the American universities. So for me, I checked off a lot of boxes, being Eurasian, an immigrant, multiple languages. I was a physics and astronomy major. So being recruited into the women's studies, I went to a very, very leftist, uber liberal Marxist university. And we're living in San Francisco, and the Berkeley, the hippie revolution and all that kind of stuff. Angela Davis, militant, communist. I mean, she was part of my professors in the women's studies department, which I was fascinated by it. And I was actually voted most liberated female when I was in junior high school, whatever. And only because I knew how to do a lot of stuff. It wasn't because I hated men or I thought women were better. I didn't think of it that way.
You just got on with it.
I just got on with it. It's like, I want to learn how to do this. Yeah, I want to learn how to tune up my own Volkswagen,
Yeah.
I need to do that. I like motorcycles. Okay, so what? I work.
Yeah.
But that was an anomaly.
Something you said there about tune up, reminded me that you are a gifted musician as well.
Yes.
I know about you. Could you talk a bit about that? How did you get into music, and what was that like?
So
actually getting into it and getting on with it, doing it.
Yeah.
Because I was always a thinker, and I'll do it tomorrow. Yeah. You clearly are a fierce fairy. You get in there. Yeah.
Well, my mother, to her credit, because she didn't want to deal with me and didn't want to spend time with me, like I would chase around. Why won't you love me, mommy? And my mom was beautiful, and I would look at her and just go, she's so pretty. And I would want to spend time with her, and she just hated me. And so I'd go follow her to her room. She'd slam the door in my face, and I would literally fall asleep in front of her door waiting for her to come out. And so what she did is she distracted me. She sent me to ballet school very early. I was 3. She sent me to piano lessons, violin lessons, gymnastics. She just wore me out with all these activities, and I took to the piano. So I actually did my first recital in front of masses of people when I was 4.
Oh,
and I tried the concert pianist route. I competed. I hated it. I wasn't all that good. I was proficient, but I wanted to do rock and roll. I wanted to play my own thing. And so I actually utilized the piano and the guitar and the violin and hitting things, making noise, as a way to express a lot of the pent up frustration energies and the sadness, the loneliness that I felt as a child, through music. And so music has been a golden thread through me. So I actually have done a lot of touring all over the world over the course of my career. I retired from performing in 2008. I'd had enough, because the music industry, just like the movie industry, is hijacked by a lot of really unsavory people and entities. And I was not one to get caught up in that. And I saw a lot of that, growing up in the 60s and 70s and being in the Bay Area, in San Francisco, and witnessing a lot of this. So I'm kind of made my own way. And because I'm classically trained, I can read music, and I'm a very good emulator of different styles. Like, I can hear it. I don't have to read it.
Yeah.
I can hear it. Tell me what key it's in, and I could do it. So I was able to support myself as a musician and do all kinds of things. So quite often a typical gig day would be, do a string orchestra. I'd have a piano bar gig, and then I'd play bass for some very hideous rock band, but whatever. We were all exploring our art and our reason for being. So I did a lot of that. Because it was a way to express. It was a way, and it was easy for me. I didn't have to deal. And then on the other hand, I also made my living as a waitress. And I used to think that waiting tables would be the only job for me, until a friend just finally told me, look, you should own a restaurant, maybe run it, but being a waitress, no.
It's not for you. Absolutely.
It's not for me. Because I was kind of mean. And of course, during the time that you and I were growing up, sexual harassment was just something that was being unraveled. And so, I encountered a lot of very, very rude men, and not to say that all men are like that, because they're not, but the ones that where I worked as a cocktail waitress, oh, forget it. And so I learned martial arts.
Reputation of say me amongst the men. Oh, don't go there, because you won't get anywhere, because she'll
I will take you out
before she'll let you touch her.
So I used to get fired quite a bit. And I know, part of my growing up is, by the time I was 20, I realized I was virtually unemployable, because at that point I'd probably gotten fired from about 25 different jobs. Because of my being resistant, my being in your face, combative. That's where I would be. I would either and I learned to fight rather than run away, because I was very good at running away, and just avoiding conflict.
I think people who come from a trauma background, they may have one particular sort of coping mechanism. For me, it was to fight, but also I would run away as well, and I would fawn. So I developed the fight, flight,
Yes.
freeze, and fawn. I
Yeah.
developed an aspect of each of those,
Yeah.
depending on where I was
Yeah.
and what
I
I
think
felt was
that's
appropriate, what I could get away
absolutely
with.
necessary.
Yeah. And you develop that at a young age. And how would you say that you were able to, um, and it may not have happened overnight, but it may have come through later. How did you shift that skill in a way? I
Yeah.
call it creative skill of the
Yeah.
traumatized person. How did you shift that creativity into a more healthy way of being?
Well, I early on, I dated a man for a very brief time, and he was very, very, very flaky. I was married twice to men who were very selfish, very self-centered,
Mm.
and who were kind of, one was into bossing me around, and the other one was looking to me to boss him around.
Okay.
So I had a lesson. In the meantime, in between husband 1 and 2, I actually dated someone for a while. It was early on. Yeah, I'm not into it. He had 3 children, and he used me as the babysitter. And one day decided he was going to go to India to go find himself. And he left his kids to me, and his parents, who happened to be my friends that lived around the corner from me in San Francisco. It was very bizarre because they mentioned their son as a ne'er-do-well with children, but they did not connect that I had dated him because I never really shared it with them. They were older. And it was funny because I went to pick up the kids, and he gives me the address of his parents, and I'm like going, oh my God,
They're
this
your
is
parents.
this
Oh
is
dear.
Ziggy and Bob's place. That is crazy. And we just laughed. We just laughed. So I was in charge of co-parenting his kids while he went off to India. And, when kids are involved and you are involved in their care, it levels the playing field. You choose right away what your choices are. And I could not be in a selfish mode to do my thing, my way, my time. I have these 3 kids.
Yeah.
And I was devoted to them because of my own upbringing. I was not going to be part of letting these kids down. When their father came back, I went to pick him up at the airport, and Jacob was now Johari. He had joined the Hare Krishna. And when he told me, I said, your kids need you. And he's looking at me. He goes, I'm not ready. I'm not ready. I'm not ready for that. I don't know if I'll be ready. And here I am in my Volkswagen. I stomped on the brakes and I told him to get out of my car.
Yeah.
I just said, get out, find your own effing way back.
Yeah.
Don't talk to me.
And that's pure and simple spiritual bullshit.
Yeah.
Isn't it? And when we're talking about spirituality, and we have to look at the dark side of spirituality, where one's fixation with one's journey can leave people strewn on the path behind you.
Yeah. I wanted to beat him up. I really did. I wanted to knock him around. I was so upset. And I thought, wow, that is just insane. Like I couldn't even, I couldn't even go there.
I get it.
Yeah.
I get it.
And I told him to get out. I felt bad about it. And it's like, no, that's it. You want to come back to America and you want to ignore your children? Goodbye. I'm not driving you around.
And when you mentioned Krishnamurti earlier, he was one of my supportive sentinels. Like you mentioned your neighbours being sentinels, as you were for those children. And one of the sentinels that I connected to was Krishnamurti when I had almost like a spiritual awakening that ended up being a breakdown, ended up being a breakthrough. And it's really interesting because it was so massive that I'm like, really, I should be talking about this. But now it was just like, oh yeah, okay, that door opened and I stepped through it.
Yeah.
But Krishnamurti was amazing. And the one thing that pulled me to him was when he said that he was hosting some sort of workshop type thing, and he was in a tent, and people were queuing up to go and ask him a question. And this woman came to him and said, I want a man, I want a husband. Can you please help me? I want to find a husband. And he said to her, do you have your own home? No. Do you work? Do you have a job? No. What can you offer in way of relationship to the man? Do you have any money or anything? No. And in that day and age, women were able to go to work and own their own homes and earn their own money. And he turned around and said, look, just look after yourself. Don't literally devolve all your being into thinking that you need to find a man to be your husband to rescue and save you, because that will not happen. Sort yourself out first.
Bravo. I remember that talk.
And it was that. And I just thought, whoa, I've never come across anything like that before. I've never. And it just blew my mind.
Yeah.
It really did. And it literally made me speak that to me.
Yeah.
And it said, sort yourself out.
Yeah.
Sort yourself out. Stop seeking parentification of yourself by putting other people in as parents.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Grow the hell up.
Right.
Grow the hell up. You know.
Yeah.
That's what it said to me.
He was really the epitome of I think the really fantastic mama and papa of the universal mind.
Yeah.
Of just really just cutting right through your flawed way of thinking and your flawed way of seeing yourself and wanting the outside reality to define you.
Yes. And he will surely have, because of the story. I mean, I then researched into his story, which briefly involved the Golden Dawn people who came to India, tried to bring him up as a spiritual leader.
As the second coming of Christ. And
absolutely. And trying to give him loads of money and set him up as some sort of guru. And he just turned around and said, you can keep your money. And he just got on a boat and went to America. And my understanding is that he made pots of money anyway, because he was a very wise spiritual guide.
Yeah.
So it happened anyway, which I found amazing.
Yes.
But he did it under his own steam. It was like he was saying, I'm going to start again from ground zero. And if it's going to happen, it's going to happen. Yeah. And I love that. But the people in the Golden Dawn will have come across Hermetica as well. So this is how it landed on me, was through all these different things. And I'll tell you, when I read the Kabbalion, and you know how old I am, and I only read the Kabbalion about...
We're just a couple years apart, my love.
No, about 2 years ago. Yeah. Was the first time I came across the Kabbalion. So when you told me you were 12 and you read it, I was just not green with envy, but I was just like, oh my God. I would have read it, about 3 pages of it, and gone, oh, I don't get that. And it would have been, you know.
Oh, I was nuts about it. And it was around actually the same time where I had received my first set of tarot cards. Right. I was gifted it's called the Hoi Polloi, and it came out in, like, I don't know, 1972 or something like that. And my mom found those in my classical guitar. I'd hidden it because she would have been completely out of her mind. Yeah. And she knew I was up to something, you know, because she just knows the stuff, and found the cards and pitched them in the garbage. Oh. And I got up in the middle of the night and I picked them up, and I still have them. I'm trying to see, do I have them here in the room? No, I don't have
same deck, the very same deck.
I still have them. Yeah.
Oh my, that's amazing. Yeah. I've recently come to tarot, probably over the last decade. But do you know what got destroyed for me when I refused to comply to something? I had a castor oil plant, a baby. And I was chucked out for an argument and went to stay with the boyfriend and said, well, I'll come and get my stuff tomorrow. Take your plants. Well, I can't carry it. I'll come back in the morning for it. Well, if you come back in the morning for it, it'll be in the bin. And I went back in the morning and my sister said, your plant's in the bin. And I went in the dustbin outside with all the thing and I fished my plant out. And it was that made me realise how bad our relationship would always be. I thought, that just does not, I couldn't compute that.
Yeah.
I literally couldn't. And I feel sorry because that person obviously then is living in that place. It's down to them to sort it out. But I realised that I'm on my own now. That's when I realised I was on my own. The bloody castor oil plant, you know. And I was a young teenager and I like plants and we didn't have plants in the house.
Me too.
Yeah.
They've taken over my house.
But it was a castor oil plant that gave me the message that I was being given for years and didn't get. You know, it was that, forget it. You're going after some horse that will always be running just in front of you.
Yes, or kick you.
You'll never catch this horse. So just don't bother. Don't bother even trying. And that was when, you know, I think that was when I got that empowered resistance rather than that destructive resistance that was copying other people's behaviors.
Yeah.
Putting the nose off.
I mean, that's how we learn. And and here was another thing about my mother. To her credit, you know, she didn't allow television, so I didn't have a TV. But my best friend across the street had a TV, and I spent a lot of time over at the Goldberg's house. And what was wonderful is that's where I got to see the shows. Like I was into Dark Shadows. I was into the Addams Family, The Outer Limits, The Prisoner, all the weird stuff. I love that stuff. I just loved it so much.
Me too.
And so I got to be choosy.
Yeah, I kept it secret. So did you come out as a fan of all things esoteric and
yes,
especially like with the Hermetica, the Kabbalion?
Yes,
it's the occult. Well, of course, me watching movies as a teenager with Dennis Wheatley, who wrote these Devil Rides Out stuff. My sister was a fan of these horror movies, and on Friday nights, me and my sister were left. You know, Mum would go out, and we'd be there, and we'd get the crisps and the
I love it. I love it. And that's,
she would make me sit there and watch bloody Dennis Wheatley movies about the Devil Rides Out, and I would be terrified. So as soon as someone mentioned the occult, then I would go away from it, but then I'd be fascinated by it. There was this,
So I have this thing about one of my earliest boyfriend, who actually ended up being husband number one eventually. We snuck off one time in the middle of the day. We took the train into the city, into San Francisco from Berkeley, and we went to go see The Exorcist. So here's the thing. We get on the theater, you had to take a cable car. The cable car got into an accident and many people were injured. And we were like running because the police came and they wanted to question everybody. And we're trying to get to the theater. So we get to the theater, and I unfortunately had eaten something that had made me sick. So I'm watching this movie, and it was a terrifying movie. For its time. I mean, just the visuals alone were like horrifying. And we were playing hooky, so we were like, uh-oh, what are we doing? And then we ran off from the scene of the crime, and we're doing this, and I'm going into the ladies' room, throwing up, vomiting. And it just was like so unpleasant. But the irony is that I actually do exorcisms for a living and deal with entities in my trauma deactivation, de-armoring work. So
Yeah.
it's just fascinating to me because I watched that movie now and I'm fascinated. Like, I love the slasher movies. I love all that stuff because they're like these hidden nuggets in it of how the mind can get manipulated into triggering atavistic memory. And so by atavism, it's our psychic DNA that runs through each one of us that mirrors the totality of human atrocities upon humans. But the problem with it is that it's not specific. So is it specific to you? Is it specific to the whole? Are you being utilized as a tool for the powers that want to be and all of their triggering mechanisms in pop culture within the matrix? Or is this an actual thing that you ought to do shadow work in? And it's very complicated to be able to divvy that up. So I've immersed myself in these horrifying movies by most people's standards, and I'm just fascinated. I'm fascinated with
how the parallels are. It's all there in soft disclosure, isn't it?
Absolutely.
How would you so for someone who isn't that familiar with the level of almost energetic comparative understanding that you've got, how would you explain to someone about the collective pressure and how it can apply? And it's so subtle that a lot of people don't see it unless they're kind of schooled in what to look for.
Right. Well, my first explanation is really a very quick rundown of the universe. I mean, if we encapsulate the universe in a circle, there's a teeny sliver of what we can actually connect with visually by our sense of smell, touch, taste, all that kind of stuff. But it's very, very limited because the rest of it we have no access to within our senses. So usually people will get it. And so I know when I hear people talk about, oh, that is just nonsense. And I tell them, listen, the majority of the universe, we can't even fathom. And so to think that because you can't see it, smell it, touch it, that you are untouchable, that is folly.
Yeah.
You are a fool to believe that because, this physical plane is just one iota of the totality of the universe.
Yeah.
Seen and unseen. And what is unseen can absolutely hurt us.
Yes.
And we need to be very, very respectful and learn more about the nature of reality, the nature of our universe, the nature of our energy fields in these human bodies. And, the various planes and levels of existence, because these are very, very real.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, New Age BS has got it all in airy, fairy, beautiful gossamer light, and just, I just have to, I got to stop myself a lot of times when especially on the Facebook, when I see these fools. And, I always have said that one of the most dangerous places on the planet are New Age fairs, where people are offering up their psychic abilities or their clearings, and they're taking entities off of you and dropping them onto the floor without any kind of safety protocols. It's like, what is going on? And I know that when I was developing my private practice, I hit a lot of these conferences, these trade shows and things, and I would spend the majority of my time cleaning up because it was unbelievable. And, I can see the stuff happening And it's frightening. It's really, really frightening how
Yeah.
naive humans are.
Yeah. And this is why when people talk about, and it's a word beginning with W, and I'm a bit hesitant to say it because of, we're on YouTube. At the end of the day, we don't want to go too far. But say, the modern practicing witches,
Yes.
People who go on Facebook and put a post, I am coming out, I am witch. I stand in solidarity with my sisters. And I just go,
Yeah.
whoa.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because some of the real
Yeah.
witches, they wouldn't even go on Facebook.
Of course not. They would
Because
not.
they're too busy
Yeah.
doing their magic in the
Exactly.
real world.
Exactly.
In the real world.
Yeah.
And I can fall into the trap because there's been times when I would say to someone and they say, oh, XYZ happened and it was synchronistic and it worked out. Like your internet provision earlier. It works at the right time. That synchronicity, we know that.
Yes.
And I would often come back and say, well, the universe has your back. I get that the universe can have your back, but it can also stab you in the back.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because what goes on here, as above, so below. So as the wars occur here, and someone has no compunction whatsoever about dropping a bomb to kill innocent, what they call collateral damage, and that is the most dangerous phrase for me in my life. If anyone ever turned around to me and said, oh, it was just collateral damage, then that's what I want to set, that dragon fire will come out. For me, there is no such thing as collateral damage.
Yeah.
They are people and they have no compunction whatsoever to do that. So why do people think that that doesn't go on up there? And it may be chaotic.
It's willful ignorance of the second hermetic principle of correspondence.
Absolutely.
They don't believe in it. They think it's nonsense. And it is, like I said, it is folly. It is dangerous folly.
Absolutely. And this is why I will only go so far with it, because I have no intention whatsoever of becoming an occultist. It fascinates me, and I can use from it what I can use from it to explain to people about mentalism and correspondence and polarity and I can't remember the vibrational, the resonance, the rhythm. I can explain all that. But if anybody said go deep into, I'd say I couldn't do that because that is not my bag, and I've got no intentions of going down that path. It's not my path. So I see that my path is to be fascinated by these things because there's an attraction, but my attraction to them is using them in the bit of it that I know can be healing. And then it's don't look behind the curtains, Jules, because that is not your path. You have to dedicate yourself to that. And I'm not prepared to do that, if that makes sense, because I know it's not my path.
Well, I utilize it with my clients and my students to really up-level their way of thinking, their way of extricating themselves and their attention from the outer matrix and the inner matrix of the mind effery that goes on when we overthink and all that kind of stuff, because that is not helpful either. But to be in our center screen, our awakened state. And I think that's, if there's one thing that really, really I find very annoying, is the hijacking of consciousness by New Age BS and other sort of spiritual practices, that the awakening is of humanity is a special thing. No, it is not. It's our natural state. Our natural state of being awake and owning our attention has been hijacked by what goes on outside of us, and utilizing that as the litmus test for our worth, our identity, along with the stuff that goes on here, where we are usually in reaction to what's going on out here.
Absolutely.
So our spiritual, our awakened true nature, our true creative nature is our natural state.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And it's astonishing to me how it's actually becoming now very, very blatant. For instance, in the UK, we have a free school provision, as I believe you do in the States as well. In the free schools, that what we call, we don't call it public school. So public school in the UK is the private fee paying.
Okay.
So we call it state school. You know, it's just ordinary school. The funding for the creative has just been wiped, and the funding for anything, the physical, the gymnastics, the sports, has been severely reduced. So anything that's healthy, which is sport and team games and collaboration, even a little bit of competition, but also creativity, anything that is healthy is just, the funding is just being literally.
That's actually the same in America as well.
And it's all about and I put, wrote something about, for me now, it's all about coding. If you can code, you've got a future. And it's almost like devil take the hindmost, isn't it? And
wow.
If you fall into that, it isn't a case of devil take the hindmost. It's about bring the creativity through, and almost blow up that balloon that is a gap in society now.
Yeah.
It behoves, for me anyway, it behoves for me to encourage people to connect to their creativity, and whatever that means,
Wow.
we've got to get creative, haven't we?
Yeah. So
how would you describe your past thus far in terms of your work? And I know you've mentioned you do I don't know what you call it, extractions, or I do know that there is a very highly psychological aspect in terms of shadow work as well. That do you use that as a platform for other things?
I do.
Or is it a thread that just runs through everything?
So the work that I do was actually the methodology itself, like the protocol itself, was actually given to me by a series of dreams back in 1987.
Right.
Whilst I was under the care of a Jungian therapist, who is probably my greatest mentor, Pearl, who passed away in 2018. And 2018 was a very pivotal year for me because it was the first completed year of my book tour in Europa. And my assistant passed away, and then Pearl passed away. So all of a sudden I'm like on my own. But so the download of this, like, I thought I was kind of going insane. It came about during the bits of my first Saturn return, which it sent my life topsy-turvy, because I was making my money doing things that were not quite in alignment. I mean, I was doing the music, but being responsible for children, and in San Francisco, you gotta up your game. And I was selling insurance, and I have a background in mathematics, and so the actuarial aspect of mathematics, or the applied mathematics, I went to a conference and realized, whoa, this is not cool, because I'm peddling fear.
Absolutely.
The way they come up with the premiums is based on the probability of how a person is going to die, based on certain variables. And I looked at this and I'm going, I can't do this.
Can't do it. And it's very similar to me. Sorry to interrupt, but I worked in that. And it was realizing that the insurance company's main aim is to avoid a claim. So they
Yes.
will do anything they can to wriggle out of paying you.
Oh, it was
And
bad.
I realised that in doing the official insurance studying exams, I shifted completely and I started working on behalf of claimants
Yeah.
rather than
Good for
insurance
you.
companies. And I literally
Bravo.
walked out and said, I can't do this anymore. And I went and worked for the opposition and said, I'd rather work for the claimants than the
Good for,
insurance company.
oh,
Well, that's really interesting that
thank you so much. It was
we've both had
very,
epiphanies through that, haven't we? You
yeah,
know?
it was very upsetting for me to have that realization. Like I couldn't even look at myself in the mirror. I was beside myself thinking, this is wrong. It's so wrong. And I
Yeah,
remember sitting with my husband telling him, I have to walk off the job. And he goes,
absolutely.
well, what are we
You're
gonna
frightened of
do?
admitting it. You're frightened of admitting it in public that you've worked for an insurance company.
Oh
You
yeah.
know,
Oh
you're like
yeah.
so ashamed.
Yeah, I worked for multiple companies. I was licensed. I did all kinds of crazy shit. And
Yeah,
so I'm just like, no, I can't do this. And so in the middle of that turmoil, I was working with Pearl and we were going through, I was doing some really deep work with the archetypes
yeah,
and the dream reality, the dream world, which by the way, just like our imagination, is just
yeah,
as real as what's out here. So
yeah,
that is part of the healing process that I do with my clients and students to go back. But the protocol of the protocol of the order in which you have to do the energy work, the energy clearings,
yeah,
the earth field, the chakras. These are the two places that you have to go first
mm,
before you can even do the clearings, because you have to make sure you are yourself.
yes,
Otherwise, any entity can speak for you out in the auric field,
mm,
or if your chakras are all hijacked by entities usurping your creative energy, well, that's a problem there.
yeah,
But you can't get to the chakras until you clear the field.
yes,
You can't get to the energy clearings because my work is meridian based. So
mm,
I studied 5-element Chinese medicine to understand the creation and the destruction
yeah. And
energies.
channels,
You have to
yeah,
understand it.
all the little windows that are the little meridians. They're
Yes,
almost like little windows in a
yes,
building that people can get
yes,
into if, something happens here, there, and everywhere.
yes,
Whereas for
yes,
me, it's literally chakra based.
yeah,
And it is more about how does the development of your chakra, say your root chakra, the likelihood, but based on the Ayurvedic, the ancient
yes,
Vedic wisdom,
yes,
the
yes,
understanding is that the base chakra develops up to
yeah.
about 18 months to 2, and then your sacral develops
Oh,
from 2
good.
to 5, stuff like that.
Yeah.
So
Well, all of
yeah,
these, they work together and
yeah,
they are purposefully separated
yeah, yeah,
to
yeah,
keep us in the matrix and in trauma. And
yes,
you have to put them all together. So when I was getting these dreams, I had no idea. I had no idea what was going on. And Pearl knew enough about so many things that
yeah,
she just sat me down and she said, you are getting a download of a protocol
okay,
of the work that you're going to be doing.
excellent. Oh, I
And I'm
just love
like, get out.
that.
I was like this. I want none of it. I don't want any of this. I don't want to do it. I was not interested in it. And of course, a series of events, it's like you start connecting the dots and you're like,
And
oh
finally, you're willing to
man,
listen to your
yeah,
own higher self.
yeah. And I finally just gave up. And
Yeah.
it's like the universe started bringing me clients. I was still selling insurance when my first client came to me, and she came to me through one of my insurance clients that rang me up and just said, I don't know why I'm doing this. I have no idea. I don't even know if you know this stuff, but here is a woman and I think you can help her. And so my very first client was the daughter of a political person in the San Francisco area who was having memories of of ritual and
Okay.
very, 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 very bleak, horrific stuff.
Okay.
And so I took it from there.
Yeah.
And I just connected the dots. It was really very, very strange. And it's like, how do I know this? I don't know why I know this. I don't know.
You
And
just
I
know.
just went
And
with it.
that's the thing. So
I just
do you think
trusted.
then, sorry to interrupt again, but do you think that this powerful thing that you brought through, when you were ready to bring it through, when you were old enough to bring it through, when
Mhm,
you were adept enough to accept it
mhm.
eventually, do you think that the trauma is um a pressure on you as a child to keep this wild horse that you are, to keep the wild horse
Yes,
calm and
absolutely.
within fear, just so that you don't try these gifts that you
Yeah,
came
yeah,
with?
yeah,
Because if you're a child and you don't know how to operate those gifts, then you could become actually dangerous. Not you end up
yeah.
becoming
You
more of
can
a
become
dangerous,
dangerous
don't you?
and the ultimate perpetrator.
Yeah, yeah. And in the shamanic world, that's why a shaman in the indigenous, they've chosen at age very young, aren't they? 10 or 11 years old. And they understand that these are children who've had really traumatic
Yeah,
experiences as
yeah,
children.
yeah,
They
yeah,
automatically
yeah.
understand the reason for that is
Yes,
that this child has come here with
yeah.
the incredible
It
gift of the shamanic practitioner.
That is such a great tie-in, Jules, because at the same time that this was happening, there were a lot of things concurrently going on. So around that time in 86, 87, I was pregnant with twins and I lost them. I lost them because I was starving myself. I was vegan. And even though I was doing all the prenatal stuff according to Western medicine in
Yeah,
American whatever,
yeah.
I gained 10 pounds by the time I was less than 7 months pregnant, and I lost my twins. One was
Oh,
stillborn. They were premature, and my son survived 72 hours. So that was going on. And then my birth father, who I knew nothing about, he had passed away a couple of years before, and they had been searching for me to help my paternal grandmother to settle his estate. I knew nothing about her, but I started forging a relationship with my grandmother, who was Finnish, Russian, Mongolian, and Chinese. And so I was introduced to a shamanic practice, Karelian shamanism, which I knew nothing about.
mm,
Getting to know my grandmother, I had a 15-year relationship with her until she
excellent.
passed away in 2001. I got
Mm,
to go to Finland. I got to go to Russia. I got to do all these things and learn about. I mean, it was like a whole universe opened for me,
yeah.
and I had no, it's like it was written in the stars
Mm,
for me to bring about this work.
yeah.
Um, and it was a huge sacrifice. I had to sacrifice a lot of my personal life.
Yep.
I didn't have relationships, and
Mm,
whatever relationships I had were very, very tempestuous, because it would push all my buttons about my longing for family, my longing for connection, for the masculine, only to realize that there was a sabotage and a usurping that was coming, that was
yeah.
endeavoring to distract me from my work. And
Yeah.
so that forging forward and being, focused in on your reason for being,
Yeah.
it's been a really, really difficult, challenging path.
It
It
has.
hasn't,
And
it
what would have
hasn't been
happened though?
fun. Yeah.
What would have happened though had you not had the courage and the awareness,
Yeah. I
despite the
probably would have been murdered, honestly.
okay,
Yeah.
yeah,
I
yeah,
I really I really see that, because I put myself I had a little bit of a death wish when I was younger,
okay,
and did things, like to drive fast, like to ride motorcycles, like to jump out of airplanes and do stupid things. I traveled a lot by myself in non-English speaking countries by myself. My friends are like going, "Are you crazy? Why would you do that?" Because I can,
And because you are crazy,
yeah,
because
a little bit.
your nature, and I don't mean crazy as in what the current medical profession would label you as, but crazy enough to recognize that there is a disconnection, a dissonance
Uh-huh.
between what we do and what
Yes,
our soul wants us to do,
yes,
in a way.
yeah, yeah. And so I did a lot of like I'd get an idea in my head and go, "Oh, okay, I'll do that."
Yeah.
And so I found myself in many situations where there was a military insurgency going on, where there was political unrest, where
Yeah.
there was, gangsters roaming the street, going door to door,
Yeah.
kidnapping women. I mean, things like that. And I don't watch the news, so I don't know what's going on.
Yeah.
But it kind of amplified it. I think a lot of my sort of psychic ability, my
Yeah.
intuition. Like there were many times where I woke up in the middle of the night going, "Okay, pack your bag. It's time to go."
So you have this, yeah, you have that spidey sense, that
Yeah, yeah,
elevated, yeah.
yeah.
Earlier on, you mentioned a book. Would you like to share with listeners the name of your book?
Oh, my book is called "Effed Wide Open: The Rude Awakening of the Heart-Based New Humanity," and it's basically a sort of memoir-ish
Mm.
of my my realizations about the awakening process to remember who and what you are,
Yeah.
despite all the crazy stuff that tries to distract you away from who you are.
Mm.
It really kind of points to the opposite of what a lot of the new age writings talk about, of the you just line up and all of a sudden the angels are welcoming you, all that kind of stuff. No, it's rude. It's utterly rude. It will kick your butt. It humbles. It's a very humbling path.
Yes,
It, you know,
absolutely. And I was listening to a guy, and I know you do a lot of work around, and I don't mean work as in work, but you are very clued up about the the connection between narcissism and empath and the shadow aspects of each. And
yes.
I particularly have chosen to discover about narcissism specifically because of not because of the almost like the dark manipulation that narcissists can become victims of themselves, as
Mm-hmm.
can empaths, but just in normal life, in just everyday life, where people tend not to be, literally in those situations, if that makes sense, where
Mm-hmm.
they
Yes.
haven't used any sort of element of narcissism to become, magicians or anything like that. Not on that plane, just on the normal humdrum day to day life of an ordinary household, suburban narcissist and empath, which is basically the background I came from. But it
Mm-hmm.
interested me because despite my um, feelings that, a parent was a narcissist, that didn't mean I wanted to hurt them or not see them be bathed in that universal love that is available
Mm-hmm.
when we can invoke it and get people to actually find it in their own hearts, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
I
Yes.
was lucky enough to find it for myself. And there was an element of where I did try to invoke healing for that person when it probably wasn't appropriate. I would have been
Mm-hmm.
imposing on their free will. I get that now. So I stepped back because it
Mm-hmm.
wasn't welcome. But that didn't mean I didn't want to understand. So I did do an awful lot of studying around how the phenomena comes about, how it gets created, and also on the soul level, and understanding about the hungry ghost element of it, and the more esoteric side of it.
Yeah.
But I've a long way of explaining that I follow this guy called Sam Vaknin, who is a diagnosed narcissist. He has NPD, but he is a professor of psychology, and he had his professorship taken off him because as part of his narcissism was that self-sabotage thing they do, and they think it's okay, that they kind of
Wow.
think they're above the law. And it was about what did he do? It was insider trading on a stock market, and he got put in prison for it.
Is he American?
Well, I think he's Israeli. I
Okay.
think he's Jewish, but he knows German incredibly well. But I
Mm-hmm.
don't know if it's Yiddish. So I think he lives in Israel.
Interesting.
I'm not really sure, but he's called Sam Vaknin, and I can link you in with his
Yeah,
stuff.
yeah.
I was
That's just
literally listening to him just
fascinating.
before we came on here,
Yeah.
and he was explaining how. So he has done videos where he's explained what it feels like to be a narcissist, and he's very real. And it's almost a horror movie when he explains what it's like inside his mind. And then he came on with one today that explained about the difference between the psychologists of the 19th century and the psychologists of the 20th century, wanting psychology to be a science. And he said the early psychologists didn't particularly want it to be a science. He said, and Jung, and not so much Jung, he didn't mention Jung, but he mentioned Freud and someone else. Said they come along and they try to turn it into a science. He said, which is almost an inverted narcissism, is making it elite. He said, but psychology is a modality, it's a practice like NLP, like talking therapy. Psychology is more like that. And it was incredible how he explained it. Absolutely
Wow.
incredible. And how he explained about the natural and the empirical self. There's a nominative self,
Mm-hmm.
which is I think he's saying that's the natural, the nature, the earthly. And
Mm-hmm.
then there is the empirical self, and how that has got two sides, and how the nominative can look at the empirical, and how you can almost psychoanalyze yourself. And he was bringing in the spiritual as an empowering energy, almost as a fuel for a vehicle. That is what
Wow.
he was saying the spiritual is. He said none of this religious bullshit, but the spiritual. But he does it coming from the almost scientific realm, because
Wow. Wow.
he's a professor, for God's sake. You do a lot of work
Yeah.
to become a professor, but he's
Yeah.
amazing, given that he is a narcissist. And
Oh, I would be
yeah,
fascinated to
he
listen.
suffers incredibly from
Yeah.
crippling loneliness,
Yeah. Yeah.
And but he does so much work for people who either suspect that they're narcissists, or people
Yeah.
who feel that
Yeah.
they've been victims of narcissists.
Yeah.
He's incredible. I think he's really incredible. I have got so much um, admiration for people who are willing to own their humanity in
Yeah.
the place
In
where
that
they have
context.
been placed in life. And that's where he's been placed. And other people who will own, like the left-hand path followers, who will say,
Mhm.
we
Mhm.
are this, but we own
Yeah.
that we are this. And
Yeah.
actually, you are too. You just won't own it.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow.
You know,
Amazing.
so anybody who says, yes, that is my nature, but I can control the darkness of my nature, which is something that um, the other psychologist guy, Canadian guy, um, oh God, can't think of his name, Jordan Peterson,
Yes,
he says the key is to be a monster, but learn to control it.
exactly. Yeah.
Because
And I completely agree with that.
if you're a Winnie Wimp all your life, you will get nowhere. And I think especially he's talking about men.
Yeah.
He's talking about the masculine, the sacred masculine, that's what I think he's talking about. But obviously women have got a certain amount of that within them
Yes.
as well. And it's about not being Winnie the Wimp. And it was like me being Winnie the Wimp for years. And, you know, keeping myself small, living in fear, frightened of putting my head above the parapet,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
and how the warrior aspect has to be honoured.
Yes. Yeah.
And if you're going to be a warrior, you've got to smash some eggs, haven't you?
Yeah. Yeah. I agree with that. You know, the evil that we want to just keep outside ourselves, it resides within our own hearts.
Yes.
And I think that that is what Jordan Peterson is referring to, is what we have within. I know for me, as a trained martial artist, if I was under attack, or if
Yeah.
any of my children were under attack, oh, I would not hesitate to take someone
Absolutely.
out.
Absolutely.
If
And I think
threatened.
that's what it's talking about, is that we've all
Yeah.
got that in us. If our
Yeah.
lives were threatened, we would take measures to protect our own. You know, when you
Yeah.
hear about these people whose kids trapped under a car, and an 8-stone woman can lift a car
Yeah.
up.
Yeah, exactly.
We have this almost superpower that is so oppressed because of they say it's because of the density that we're in. We're behind the veil, you know.
Yeah,
But
I don't agree
have
with
we
that. I
not
think
created that?
it's mental.
Exactly. And I thought, have we not just created that? Because that's
Yeah.
what we believe. That, you know, and I know you do a lot of work about escaping the matrix and transurfing, and I'd love to talk to you more. Time's coming so that I'm going to have to end the recording very soon, and I would love to carry on talking to you about all kinds, you know. So if you're willing, I'd love to
Yeah,
invite you back
absolutely.
at another
Absolutely.
time.
It's
So
like gone by so fast.
I know. What I will do is say that I will put your links in the description below when we publish this. It will probably be, you know, about 10 days or so before it gets published. And when it gets published, I will obviously put in your links. People can
Thank
contact
you.
you. They can have a
Thank
look at your website, put your book title there. People can have a look at that. If people want to get to know you better and get to understand a bit more about what you do, because we've only scratched the surface, I know that. So
Thank
I'm
you.
winding up there, and I'm going to thank you so, so much for coming on,
Thank you,
and
Jules.
to you too.
Pleasure.
Yeah. So deep bow, and hope I'll speak to you again soon.
You will. Big love.
Thank you. Bye.